Our next speaker is the person that currently holds the record for the most speaking appearances on Code. Yeah. That is an achievement, I suppose. The last time I introduced him on stage, I said that it is now the third time that I introduce the speaker, and I'm running out of new things to say. It is now the fourth time. Anyway, consultant, trainer, writer, focusing on programming practices and the human aspect of software development. Co-author of a book, of many books actually, but one called Pattern-Oriented Software Architecture. Kevlin Henney.
Right, thank you very much, Frederick. I can say I have not run out of things to say. I have been told by my wife that that will be called my death. When I have run out of things to say, I will be dead. You know, it's not a measure of brain death or pulse or anything like that. So he's stopped talking. Okay, it's done. Yes, I'm going to talk about learning from failure. Not in the broadest aspect, but specifically software failures. Now, you know, a kind of common question these days is, hey, Kevlin, is there any AI in your talk? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there is AI right there, and just we'll highlight that. Yeah. So yeah, but that is actually the only AI in this talk. The rest is made up by natural intelligence, us, and the mistakes that we make in software systems. So yeah, I'm Kevlin Henney. You can find me in a variety of places, social media-wise. Follow me on Mastodon and Blue Sky is probably where I post the most stuff. Instagram, it's just my photos. I mean, it's not pictures of my breakfast or my family or anything like that. It's just photography. Every now and then somebody will DM me a technical question on that. That's really weird and dissonant. That's not what that channel's for. Do that on LinkedIn, please. And I have a blog as well. I also have an internet unique name, which does occasionally allow me to get Kevlin as the kind of the name, as you can see, I've done on Mastodon, Social, and Blue Sky. But my name has, in some circles, become associated with something else. My name has become associated with failure. Not sure how I feel about that, but here we have an example. Arrived in Bologna, I saw a Kevlin Henney screen. Now, this is 2016. What has happened here is that over a number of years, whenever things would happen, you know, I would end up noticing the degree to which the world around us is ruled by software. And more importantly, as software developers, we, as a profession, we are the largest creators of accidental guerrilla installation art on the planet. Okay? Feel free to use that on your CV or your next job title if you're asked, hey, you can invent your own job title. Yeah, okay. Accidental artist. You know, and I started taking initially screenshots, but then cameras on phones happened. And so suddenly I am where the failures are. And I started taking pictures of these, sometimes sharing them in my workshops or just showing them to people. And then we hit the era of social media. People started sending them to me and @ing me in them. And then I started retweeting them, kind of as a point of amusement, as a reminder. We should be humble in the face of all these failures. Collectively, we do a few of these things. But as a reminder that the stuff that we think might work might not work. There's always a case. That, as it were, these beautiful abstractions and these marvelous systems that we create, when they fail, all of that illusion just disappears. Yeah? And then people started, well, this is the inception event. People started sending them to me, and this guy said, oh, I saw a Kevlin Henney screen, and then people started calling them Kevlin Henney screens, and then just Kevlin Henneys. Not sure if I'm time traveling, but pretty sure there is no -1 a.m. or p.m. So, it turns out that time is a very common thing that people mess up, time in calendars. But it's just a reminder of, these things appear everywhere. Yeah, so we can gamify the process, literally, of getting money. And you see this question here. Does this count as a Kevlin Henney? So every now and then I get a question from people saying, why do people send you these things? Why do you retweet them? What is a Kevlin Henney? And I've given various explanations at times, and then eventually I decided last year I was going to blog it. FAQ, what's a Kevlin Henney? It is the most frequently asked question I get. Recent events, July the 23rd, 24, CrowdStrike. That was a very busy day for me. Prompted me to finally write up an answer to what is perhaps one of those frequently asked questions I receive. The question is normally in the form, what's Kevlin Henney? What's Kevlin Henney screen? Why do people send you failure screen pictures? So I actually blogged this. What is interesting is that a number of years ago, somebody, and I know who, it's Hadi Hariri of JetBrains, but I didn't know that at the time. Somebody put me in Urban Dictionary. Which is, I used to use Urban Dictionary as a way of finding out what my kids were talking about, but now I'm there. Yes, there is a strong association with the concept of failure, and we're kind of familiar with this idea. So we ought to look at failure. What do we mean by this? So failure as a noun, if you kind of raid the dictionaries, it's the fact of failing. It is the omission of expected or required action. Okay. The action of ceasing to function or the state of, but my favorite, an abrupt cessation of normal functioning. Very, very kind of like slightly glossy English, dictionary English, but it's just like, yeah, it's not working. Boof. But I also want to talk about learning. So I've done talks on failure, but I also want to remind, I want to pay a little bit of attention to the fact that our ability to learn from failure is not brilliant. People often say, you learn from failure. This is incorrect. You need an extra word in there. You can learn from failure. It's optional. It is absolutely optional. Sometimes, oh yeah, you learn from failure. Honestly, I'm looking at the world right now. That's not true. You can. It's an option. It's an invitation. But most people decline the invitation. You have to put work in to look at these events and go, I wonder what we can learn from that. And sometimes we don't walk away with quite the right lesson, or we walk away with only part of the lesson. Knowledge or skills acquired through experience or study by being taught. Okay? So some of it is experience, us in the world. Some of it is directed. It is a matter of teaching and education. Receiving instruction or acquiring knowledge. Again, we've got that kind of idea of explicit instruction. A failure event is an opportunity at this point. It's been given to you, but we don't always acquire the knowledge. Modification of a behavioral tendency by experience. That's the interesting one. We're really bad at that. It's that actually modifying and doing something different. So there's a kind of an interesting play on words here. Becky Chambers, one of my favorite authors, if you read science fiction, actually even if you don't, she writes very optimistic future fiction. But she also writes very character-oriented stuff. And this is a lovely little novella. To be taught if fortunate. This quote, this is the point. If we are fortunate, we will be taught. But it's not mandatory. This is actually a quote from the golden discs that were on the Voyager probes. Kurt Waldheim, Secretary General of the UN in the late 70s, recorded this message. I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet. We step out of our solar system into the universe seeking only peace and friendship, to teach if we are called upon, to be taught if we are fortunate. And that is the question that we want to ask here. What is it that we can learn from these events? So I'll start with something that's very simple. And this was posted. I stumbled across this last year, Quantum Lock. I didn't know anything about these guys at all. Quantum Lock, it's a game from a company based in New Mexico, Fat Bomb Studios. They apparently had this game created this game in 2015, but last summer they shut down the game. Hey everyone, Quantum Lock was our first game, and although it was a big milestone for us, it was created at a time before we understood version control software. You know, they don't have to say anything else. We understand what they're saying. Yeah, it's one of those things of like, you know, it's just like you can automatically complete what's actually going on here. Now, in one sense, there is an obvious lesson here. And so I edited this book a number of years ago, 97 Things Every Programmer Should Know. And indeed, there's this piece that kind of tells you everything that you need to know about this particular topic by Diomedes Spinalis, put everything under version control. I love titles that tell you exactly what's going to happen here. I wonder what this piece is about. There is no wonder here. It's straight up simple advice. But is it? Or rather, there is something else going on here. There are actually a few things. First of all, you are always working with incomplete knowledge. No matter what you are doing, you don't know everything. You don't know, and more importantly, you don't know everything about the job that you're supposed to be doing. Now, there's huge implications here. Implications for things like planning. Okay, planning. We work without complete knowledge, so how can you have a detailed plan of something you don't actually have complete knowledge about? I sometimes sort of remind people, I say, just out of interest, show of hands, I'm not going to turn around for magic, okay? I see you. I'm on this right now. Who here uses a to-do list? Yep, that's quite a lot of you. Who here ends the day having completed everything on their to-do list? Oh, there's one. You're an outlier, but you're statistically relevant. I acknowledge your presence on the distribution. And who here, even if you haven't completed everything on the to-do list, reaches the end of the day with the same items on the list that they started the day with, as in, or rather, they did not add anything during the day. They neither added nor removed nor adjusted anything on the day. Does anybody reach the end of the day? You are today's, oh, we got 2 or 3. Wow, amazing. Statistically, as we've just demonstrated by this thorough scientific evaluation, it just doesn't happen. That's one day. When somebody starts talking about projects that span multiple people and multiple months, the probability of you even getting close to what you thought was going to be in there is so close to 0. It's hugging it so closely, it's practically a floating point rounding error to 0. It is. So here's the reminder. You are always working with incomplete knowledge. But it's really cool. You're human. It turns out we're quite good at this. We reach the end of every... Oh, wow, amazing. I didn't know what was going to happen today, and here I am at the end of the day. Pretty much every single day until one particular day. But that point is, you have a really good record of doing that. So here is the reminder. You don't know everything. In software development, we don't know everything. Some of the things that if you've been around for a long time are blindingly obvious to you, and you just know. They are things that you do know. It's not just things you should know. You do know them. But when you're starting out, how do you get to know the things that you're supposed to know? It's not automatic and obvious. There's so much to choose from. There are so many sources of advice. So we also need to be a little bit humble. But so that's a reminder. There's another thing here which I think is really interesting, which is that they admitted it. There is an honesty here which is lacking in a lot of companies. Hey, you know what? We made a mistake, and we now know better. A lot of people kind of don't do that. It turns out another thing about being human is, we feel we might be judged. We green shift things. We don't report things as they are. They said, you know what? We didn't know. Oh, okay, cool. Now, that's brutal honesty. That's actually the most amazing thing about this thing. As an aside, I'd also say there's another thing. Take backups. It's not the same as doing version control. It's complementary if you take backups because, if everybody says, oh, it's fine, all our code is on GitHub. Yeah, because GitHub is always going to work forever. I just want you to evaluate that statement. Right, okay. Take backups, okay? Backups will save you from pretty much most things. So there's a lot to be learned here. There's a lot to be learnt. EA Games. A lot to be learnt. I kind of joked about games or gaming earlier. Who's heard of EA Games? Yeah, really large games studio. So here was an interesting thing that happened a year ago. We are aware of an issue on console in which the game may crash on startup. Well, that's not good. This is currently being investigated and will be fixed as soon as possible. So the thing I want to point out to you is the date. Yeah. Guidance for PlayStation players. On your console, set the date and time manually to the 1st of March. Oh, there's a lot to learn here. I love date and time stuff and calendar stuff. I just love it. It's great. I'm going to quote Kristen Gorman. She had this piece on this where she just pointed out that basically all of our date and time stuff is an unhappy marriage between astronomy and politics. And I love that thing. It's just like, yeah. So let's look at this. So I'll do this in C. For a number of reasons. Well, this translates easily into a number of other languages, but C gives you kind of like all the power and elegance of assembler combined with the readability and obfuscation of assembler. I mean, perfect. So, brilliant. Is leap year? Okay, I'm going to give it a whole number. Yeah, okay, great. So, here is the implementation that was used at EA Games. Actually, the point here is that this is the implementation they used at EA Games. It's just like, oh, what leap year? So they completely forgot about it. Now, I just made a point about incomplete knowledge, but there is a point here about this is not incomplete knowledge. Most people kind of are aware of the whole, oh yeah, every 4 years there's a kind of like 29th of February. And so for a lot of people, they walk around with this mental model. This is what most people believe a leap year is. And honestly, if EA Games had done that, they would be good until the end of the century. There's a 198-year window that they can hit with this one. This is the Julian year determination. This is the Gregorian year one. It's a little more complex. Introduced in 1593, and then one of the slowest rollouts in history over a period of nearly 350 years because of politics. So the October Revolution in Russia, it wasn't in October. We have a whole load of things like that. And each country migrated to this one differently. So this is actually the full rule. And most people are slightly astonished by this. I love it as a teaching example. I use it extensively, and I will continue using it because statistically, I'm never going to reach saturation where people know this. Every 4 years, except every 100, with a further except of every 400, okay? Which means 2000 was a leap year. So, normally I would end this piece here, but you know what? I'm in Sweden. Sweden, I want to talk about Sweden's adoption of the Gregorian calendar. Was difficult and protracted. That is one of the most excellent understatements from Wikipedia. I mean, it's just like, there is no country that has done it this badly. So, if you are Swedish, you can own that. If you're not Swedish, you can point at the Swedes and go, Jesus Christ. What do I mean? Right, okay, so these calendars are out of alignment. So a lot of countries did the sensible thing. They said, you know what, there's a point in time here. We're in one calendar, and then we will jump tomorrow to the other calendar. We will go from Julian to Gregorian, and there will be a jump in not the day of the week, but in the calendar, okay? So across the water, in Denmark, they did it around 1700, but Malmö was no longer part of Denmark by this point, so that's history. A number of places did this fairly carefully. Britain and its dependencies, 1752, 2nd of September, then became 14th of September, okay? But not here. So this is how it worked. Up until 1700, this applied. And then the idea was, what we're going to do is we're not going to do a one-moment adoption, an overnight adoption of this. Oh no, what we're going to do is we're going to spend 40 years migrating calendars. We are gently going to drift, like the elegant moment in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you see one craft dock with another over a period of minutes. We are going to drift over a 4-decade period from one calendar, gently departing the shores of the Julian calendar and arriving on the shores in 1700, we will not have a leap year. And this will apply up until 1740. There will be no leap years. After 1740, we will then have docked with the good ship Gregorian, and it will look like this. But for a period of 40 years, we will be completely out of step with the rest of Europe, which makes Brexit look trivial by comparison. However, so this is basic. So let's put this in code. Okay. Now, I mean, that's a terrible plan. Remember what I said about plans earlier? This is a terrible plan. But there's something worse than a terrible plan. It's not even being able to execute your terrible plan. Because what actually happened is they skipped a leap year in 1700. But there was also a war going on. Guess what? Russia. Great Northern War. And this was not administered very well. So in 1704, everybody continued to have they had a leap year. In 1708, they decided to have a leap year. Because it turns out that when you are prosecuting a military campaign, changing calendars is not a really good idea. Well, we turned up where we were supposed to, but everybody was dead, because apparently the battle was yesterday. Turns out, not a good plan. But I am going to so this was basically what happened. You can see 1753 was when Sweden finally decided to adopt the Gregorian calendar in one go. February the 17th, boom. It's the 1st of March, the day after. But no, I'm going to pick out one particular year, because 1712 is special. 1712 is super special. Oh, it wasn't just a leap year. It was kind of Carl XII basically said, look, this isn't working, folks. We need to go back to the old calendar. But the only way you can do that is to readjust, because you're already a day out. You've got to make it really true that it's a leap year. Now, this doesn't work, and this is the other reason I kept it in C, until you turn this into an integer, because it turns out that true plus true is 2. It turns out that in 1753, and here is a calendar from 1753 in Sweden, Februaris, and 30th. Yes, there was a 30th of February. Outstanding, folks. Well done. I'd like to say that by 1967, when the decision was made to move from the left side of the road to the right side of the road, this was done in one go, very carefully and properly managed, rather than, we will spend 40 years migrating the side of the road. Now, the point here, there's a lot of points to be picked up, but there's another one I want to make here. It's about assumptions and about how things fit together in international standards. Here is the C standard, very carefully worded in its definition of time management stuff, years since the 1st of January. The C standard accounts for 366 days in the year. It does not account for 367. So technically, in a correctly conforming implementation of the C standard library, the Swedish calendar cannot be fully represented. Just as a point here. So, in 97 Things Every Java Programmer Should Know, I made this observation. The most obvious lesson is that date time handling is harder than people expect, even when they're expecting it. So, what can we learn, both from the EA point of view and from others? First point is, talk to somebody. If you are the person writing the code, you shouldn't be the only person who ever sees that code. Pair program, mob program, peer review. Socialize it, because these are some of the really obvious stuff that we know, just do that. And please don't put 365 in your product names, it makes you look stupid. Microsoft aren't a sponsor, are they? No. But that's one thing. The other thing is, daytime handling is hard. Do not assume any domain which you use every day is something that you have expert knowledge in. Everybody has casual knowledge of dates. Very few people know how ridiculously ridiculous their calendar systems are. This is not nuclear science. This is everyday stuff, and we look over it because we're so familiar with it, we know everything. No, you don't. If somebody has written a library, libraries are not perfect, But you can be sure that if somebody has distributed a library to millions upon millions of people, there is more chance they are right than you are. Okay? Let somebody else do that heavy lifting. And more importantly, that patch. Yeah, domain expertise is not something that you should assume you're always able to acquire in every single domain to the same level of detail. Use libraries. Libraries are not perfect, but they are more likely to be better, statistically. And if not, just still somebody else's problem. It makes your life easier. So we do that, but also understand that even in these cases, humans will always find a way to make something much, much harder. Okay, no matter how good your tech is. So, we've talked about money a little bit. I've done the dates. Let's really talk about money. Really talk about money. The Making of a Fly. This is a book on genetics. It is apparently, or was apparently, quite widely recommended. I did a workshop for a company a number of years ago, and it turns out I made the passing reference to this story, and one of the guys in the room had a PhD in genetics and said, yeah, this is quite highly recommended. As you can see, this is an image. It's a stock image off the internet, so it's not a photograph I took. You can see it's kind of very second-hand. How much does a first-hand copy of this book cost? Well, Michael Eisen noticed in 2011 that you could buy it for $1.7 million US. Wow, this must be some book. If you went to the other bookseller that was offering it on Amazon, it was $2.2 million. This is some book. If you buy it secondhand, though, it's $35. Okay, I'm going to get the secondhand version because buying it, I mean, I like a new book, but it turns out I don't have that kind of money. $35, I think I can do. So what happened? How did this get wildly out of control? Well, it turns out that it was changing on a daily basis. It was slowly spiraling out of control. There were only 2 vendors on Amazon that were offering this. Profnath and Bawdy Book. And so Michael Eisen tracks it over successive days. And he tracks the ratios. It turns out from this that Profnath have the book. Because they've obviously instituted they have automated this so that they are the people who are offering, basically it's the standard deal. We are the cheapest anywhere. If you can find anything that is cheaper than the product, the price of the product we are selling, we will undercut that. And so they are basically looking for the other members of the market, and they are going for the cheapest 99.8% of that price. They will always undercut the other people. There's only one other person here. Now, Bawdy Books, however, have a different strategy. They do not have the book. Bawdy Books is basically saying, you buy it from us and we will buy it from the other people and do a 28% markup and pass it on to you. Now, what happens when you let these 2 be the only players in the game? At this point, Amazon kind of stepped in and stopped this. An observation from Earl Wiener, who is kind of safety-critical systems expert in the aviation domain, made this observation. Digital devices tune out small errors while creating opportunities for large errors. Yeah? Humans cannot be this wrong or this stupid at this speed. We need computers to do that. We can be modestly wrong and modestly stupid, but it takes technology to amplify that. We see this in flash crashes, okay? I've already made one Brexit reference here. Here's another one. October 2016, the pound wasn't doing very well, and it was highly volatile, and it had been devalued quite significantly. But humans cannot make a market drop that quickly in that time frame. That's called algorithmic trading, okay? You want to do something really stupid at great speed, you need computers for that. And this is kind of an important point. You need to look beyond what you think of as the system. The developers of all of these systems, algorithmic trading and the book-selling algorithms, individually, their pieces of code, their part of the system was correct. There was nothing technically wrong. But you can put 2 things that are correct together and make a thing that is wildly incorrect and has aberrant emergent behaviors. And that's a point. You need to have a bigger view. It's a lovely book, this 101 Things I Learned in Architecture School. It's actually about architecture, not software architecture. And a quote from the Finnish architect, Eliel Saarinen: always design a thing by considering it in its next larger context. So what we're learning from this is exactly this idea of the appreciation. We often see our system. If you're a developer, you see the code within your editor, within your IDE, and that's the scope of your universe, and you're aware of other things. If you are the product manager, you may have a larger view, but again, it's still not the whole view. You need to take another step back. It turns out that lots of correct things can interact in a way that surprises us. We cannot anticipate everything, but there is this idea of evaluate crazy ideas, because it turns out that reality will probably be crazier than anything you dream up. Look for these things. Look for guardrails. Look for plausibility checks. Just check these things, because testing, it turns out, is surprisingly cheap. Do something crazy. Just see how your system responds. So moving forward from 2011 to 2012, here we've seen somebody trying to earn a lot of money. I want to talk about the opposite. How much money can you lose in how little time? And Knight Capital, trading, a trading firm, 2012, 31st of July, all's good. 1st of August, not so much. There was a change in the New York Stock Exchange in terms of the data. Everybody knew about this. All the companies have been advised, yeah, here is this change, in terms of the packets and data that we will be sharing and making available and all the rest of it. Get your systems ready. So this is all good. So to answer that previous question, Knight Capital lost $460 million in 45 minutes. Actually, they lost more. They lost a lot more. This is 460 million after they'd rolled back all of the transactions. There is a kind of agreement that if a trade is made incorrectly because of a software fault, it can be rolled back. They lost billions. But this is the loss after they rolled everything back. They were worth about 430 million. You can do the maths at this point and realize that they went bust. Okay? I mean, that's impressive. Nobody's given me the power to lose $10 million a minute, or 10 million anything a minute. There are a number of things that played into this. But one of the most interesting things, I mean, it took the 45 minutes to respond because they had to go up the chain of command and get management approval and stuff like that. We're losing money at a heritage. No, I'm in a meeting. It's very important. Yeah, probably not as important as the existence of the company. Yeah, one of those things, yeah. So this really nice blog post by Doug Seven looks at it from a DevOps perspective. He says, the update to the SMARS, the system in question, was intended to replace old unused code referred to as PowerPeg, functionality that Knight hadn't used in 8 years. The code that was updated repurposed an old flag that was used to activate the PowerPeg functionality. This is a really kind of, I'm going to say this is not a stupid thing. This is or if it's stupid, it is certainly widespread. I've certainly done this, where you've got a fixed protocol, or whether it's a binary level thing or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, it's going to break everything if we change the well, we could reuse that thing that nobody's using anymore. Brilliant, let's repurpose it. Yeah, you do this at home. We do this with physical space. It turns out we also do it sometimes with this. Changing protocols. Protocols are agreements. Literally, that's where the word kind of comes from, or the way that we use the word. And the point here is if you break a protocol, yeah, that affects a lot of people, and you might not have control over it. So why don't we just recycle this? Yeah, that would all be great, except for one thing. There's this old code. Now, this is where I depart from Doug Seven's observation on this. He said, why code that had been dead for 8 years was still present in the code base is a mystery, but that's not the point. Oh, but it is. It is. Absolutely is the point. It is, the whole point of this is that these really bad events do not normally happen because of one thing or another. They happen because of one thing and another. It's the and. The ors are fine. If they had dead code, they had dead code for 8 years. That was fine. If they hadn't had dead code and they had incorrectly handled the flag, then that would have also been fine. But there is this imperfect and devastating marriage that happened when both of those were present. So, my observation on this one. Delete and decode is not a technical problem, it is a problem of mindset and culture. But here's the other thing that I haven't told you. During the deployment of the new code, however, one of Knight's technicians did not copy the new code to one of the 8 Smiles computer servers. They were deploying it on 8 servers, but they did so manually. They did not automate this. And maybe we don't automate everything, but if you are going to do this, remember other human beings. We are all imperfect, but normally our imperfections are different to other people's. Knight did not have a second technician review the deployment, and no one at Knight realized the PowerPay code had not been removed from the 8th server. So there was one little server busy firing off all of these inappropriate transactions. This is why, by the way, is anybody getting on a plane in the next few days? I don't want to worry you, but okay. I'm not, no, I took the airplane one out, it's okay. But the point is, when you go on a plane, you will listen to the announcements. There is a point where they say something along the lines of, cabin crew, arm the doors and cross-check. Arm the doors, cross-check. That means that one of the cabin crew goes and checks the other cabin crew's locked door. They cross over, yeah? So, what do we learn from this? First of all, if it's dead, make sure it's dead. Zombie code, the zombie apocalypse, is not what you want. Oh, we thought that code was dead, but it's alive, I tell you. No. You need to make sure, bury it. Delete it. Oh, but I don't give a damn about your but. You've got a version control system. That's going to remember stuff for you. And if you say, oh, but we're not sure, then that's not a problem of the code. That's a problem of your knowledge of the code and how you organize your code and how you instrument your code. This is data you should have. You should know whether or not this piece of code is used. If you go, oh, honestly, I don't know. It's kind of like, that's terrible, because we can actually monitor everything. So there's a point here. This is knowledge that we should have, and if we don't have it, let's go find it. And we can do that, because it turns out that you can do that using code. Then get rid of the code. Also, automate the things that are we are human. Automate things that are error-prone. But also, in addition to, or independently from that, socialize your code. You're not the only person doing it. Have other people look at it. Do it together. We have a couple of other little incidents. This is a nice outage. O2, just a small one. Very interesting, very modest. Happened in 2018. It was the run-up to the Christmas market in the UK. People rely on their mobiles. The O2 provider, more than 30 million mobile customers unable to get online. That's quite a big deal. Population of the UK, 65 million. Yeah, this is a lot of people are going to be affected by this. Not a good thing. And then you end up with the blame game. O2 blames supplier software glitch. Yeah, the supplier was, oh, hang on, this wasn't intentional. I've just realized the supplier was Ericsson. They're Swedish, aren't they? Yeah, this talk is way more Swedish than I intended it to be. O2 outage highlights importance of software certificate audits. This is the follow-up. A major outage was caused by an expired certificate. Again, remember that thing about focus. That thing about attention. This is my system. This is my part of the system. Certificates, oh, that's not my part of the system. That's not really software. We use the word system because it's all the things kind of fitting together. Oh, that certificate, which you might think, oh, that's just a detail. Honestly, a major outage affecting half a country is not a detail. It's definitely newsworthy. Initial answer to the problem by OT supplier Ericsson, which also supplies back-end equipment, etc., etc. Other people were affected by this. But there's a point here. The point here is that no detail is too small, because that's the whole point of software. We often dismiss things. We often say things like, oh, that's just a detail. I've said it. You've probably said it. You've certainly heard it. But now I'm going to put a trap in there. Next time you hear it or say it, stop yourself or stop the person. Wait a minute. That's the whole point of software systems. They work because everything fits together. It is all details, all the way down. There is nothing else. That is what makes software both interesting and hard. There's no hand-wavy stuff. It turns out you have to get the details right, otherwise you don't have a system that works. So, yeah, do that. Finally, I guess I ought to talk about Friday the 13th. I remember somebody saying last year, Kevlin, it's a real shame that CrowdStrike wasn't on Friday the 13th. And I said, oh, you're not a developer. Of course it's on the 13th, if you count in hex, like all good people. So, I mean, that's my geek credentials, but here's the rest of the credentials. Yeah, this is where people started. I was, yeah, perhaps the greatest Kevlin Henney event of all time. And yeah, busy day for you, I suppose. It was, and I was not online at the time. I was at my parents' and my phone, and was doing all kinds of stuff. So I normally disable all my notifications, but somehow people managed to message me via the few things that I have notified. Then I go online, and it's just like, whoa, what have I done? There is a thing here as well about failure. And so George Kurtz, you know, higher up in CrowdStrike, said this of the event. We still, by the way, don't know how much that event cost. CrowdStrike is actually working with customers, impact, etc. It's the last two sentences. This is not a security instance or cyber attack. The issue has been identified, isolated, and fixed. This is not a security incident or cyber attack. It absolutely is. Absolutely. There is no difference between a large-scale denial of service that prevents people from using the systems in the way that they expect and has the potential to corrupt data and compromise things. Doesn't matter who it comes from. It's the intention. The whole point is that any failure is potentially an attack vector. That's the point. It is a security incident. It was one of the biggest security incidents we've ever had. Now, there was a whole summary about this, and there was a lot of bits and pieces, but it turns out one of the most interesting things here, blah, 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 the sensor expected 20 input fields while the update provided 21. This is an off by one error. One of the most common mistakes that anybody will make. And it's so common that it will strike you at any point in your coding career if you are a developer. It will strike you in the first piece of code that you ever write, and you can have been raised to senior, uber senior developer, and 25 years later you can make an off by one error still. It turns out it's there waiting for you. Off by ones, it's just like, yeah, we kind of count things kind of like a little bit. So there is a whole point about this one. And this was to do specifically with an error in configuration. And this is a paper published in 2014. Early detection of configuration errors to reduce failure damage. Again, another one of these great papers where everything you need to know is in the title. And they said, well, our study, they studied a whole load of software and failures. Our study shows that many of today's mature, widely used software systems are subject to latent configuration errors, LCEs, in their critically important configurations. Because it turns out people have a blind spot when it comes to configuration. It's just like they have a blind spot. They don't see it. And there is a point here that people kind of, and I'm going to say, you know, to their credit, CrowdStrike do apparently have a really good way of testing their code. There's a problem, though. They have one process for code and one for config. Okay, this is from a blog by Dylan Ratcliffe. It is a really common blind spot that we often think of config as not important. And I've had this debate, and funnily enough, I wrote this in a blog post a few years ago. I get to a point, I basically take a piece of code, amongst many things, I take a piece of code, and then I migrate it from a piece of just straight procedural code to a piece of code that is much more declarative, and then I remove the config, and I ask people, at what point did those numbers become configuration? Where in this progression this refactoring progression, did we suddenly have config. The minute it's config, it's out of sight, out of mind. And the problem is, config is, the config is vitally important, and people often will have that as a blind spot. They will test everything else. So configuration is formal structure for specifying how some aspect of software should run. That's what config is. If that sounds familiar, there's a reason for that, because it's code. That's what code does. Your config is code. It is part of our concern. So therefore, not only should all of the assets be version controlled and widely reviewed, but it's also a case of no detail is too small. And that thing that is outside your immediate area of focus, try and bring it in, or have somebody bring it into that focus, because they all have to play together. So that's kind of the lessons there. The simplest of errors, off by ones. Nobody's immune to them. And it turns out that you might say, oh, that's just a little error, and off by one. It's just like, yeah, but it's only little because it's in this little piece of code that I got you to do for an exercise. But what if I did this on a planet-wide thing? Well, we have the answer to that question, by the way. So, Norman Cousins observed that history is a vast early warning system. It tells us so much. And we have the wisdom of Jorge Santayana. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But we also have the wisdom of another George, Georg Hegel. What experience and history teaches this: people never have learned anything from history or acted on principles deduced from it. So I leave you with the invitation to prove him wrong. Thank you.